Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're able to join us today for our 49er Industry Chat. I am Noemi Guevara, the Director of Alumni Engagement here at Cal State Long Beach. Before we start the session and introduce our next speaker, I would like to let you know that this session is being recorded and we will be putting it on demand on our website at csulb.edu/alumni. Also, just a reminder to please submit any questions you have for our speaker today in our Q&A box below. And now, I would like to introduce Lucia Cos, an alumnus from 1975, who currently serves as an Alumni Council member for CSULB alumni. Lucia, the stage is yours.
Oh, thank you. My name again is Lucia Cos, and I'm especially privileged to help moderate today's speaker because he works for Southern California Edison. It was my very first and only job after I graduated from Cal State Long Beach. So go Beach and go Southern California Edison. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Eduardo Martinez, who is the Senior Forecaster and Advisor of Southern California Edison. He's from the class of '98. And he graduated with a BA in International Business from Cal State Fullerton in 1993. Then he went on to earn his master's in economics from Long Beach State in 1998. Eduardo is now a senior advisor forecaster for Southern California Edison, and he forecasts long-term electricity demand for over 5 million customers. He has worked as an economist and a forecaster for more than 20 years. Past economist positions included the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the State Department, Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation, and Moody's Analytics. Eduardo's been with Southern California, he is a Southern California native, and he grew up in Yorba Linda. Outside of work, he volunteers with the Pasadena Tournament of Roses Association, and he's active in the marching arts world as a visual designer and judge. Please welcome, as today's speaker, Eduardo Martinez.
Thank you for an outstanding introduction. Really appreciate that. And I'm really happy to be here to be able to speak to a wide range of alums, recent grads, and current students today. I think it's just going to be an informal back and forth between me and Lucia. Feel free to type in questions, and as they pop up, Lucia's going to flag them for me, and I'll be more than happy to address them. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen to show you the little presentation that I have. It's pretty informal, and again, it'd be better if this is a little bit more organic and back and forth with the folks who are online. So let me get this here. And you guys can see my screen, right? Awesome. Okay. Oh. Here we go. So as Lucia mentioned, I was a graduate student at Long Beach State, actually for 3 years. So in between me getting my international business degree from Cal State Fullerton in 1993 and starting the econ program at Long Beach around 1995, I was actually working full-time doing import-export for a customs broker in the Redondo Beach area over by LAX. And I kind of did that transition from a full-time worker, part-time student to starting the graduate program on a part-time basis. Then about a year and a half in, I went full-time and was able to be a TA in the econ department, which was really great. But one of the best things that I did back then was to get an internship. It's invaluable. Really want to encourage the folks that are still in school right now is to take advantage of the Job Placement Center on campus, obviously, but different programs. So what I had done back then, I had gotten in touch with an organization called HACU, the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, and they provide internship opportunities for students, any ethnicity, any background, but they'll place you back then with the federal government, and now they have private sector internship experiences too. What that allowed me to do the summer between my last year before I got the MA program, I was able to get a job as an economist for the summer to get real world economic experience. And I really can't say how invaluable that was to have that 3 months of experience that really helped me in the job market, getting my first job in Washington, D.C. with the federal government. But from then on too, because I had that track record. And I'm assuming that these slides will be available after. I have some links here, URLs, and getting some acknowledgements here. So really want to encourage folks that are still in school right now that are on this program. Even if you're just a freshman or a sophomore, start thinking about it, what kind of internships experiences. Go to the Job Placement Center. I know they have really great people working there. I know each of the departments usually have someone who's kind of tracking those experiences. But I really can't say how invaluable that was to starting my experience as a professional economist, those 3 summers that I spent, summer 1997, summer before I graduated.
Eduardo?
Yes.
Because we have some students here, and this is good for the young alum too. What, for the type of work that you do and for the different pieces that you're going to be talking about today, what are some of the disciplines besides economics that would be drivers for this kind of industry?
It's a wide range, and I actually have a couple of slides towards the end that touch upon that. So obviously STEM, right? So we have a lot of engineers that we work with, electrical, but also mechanical. Quite a few civil engineers, because if you think about the planning that the utility has to do across the region. But we also have a lot of people with like regulatory affairs, legal backgrounds, policy. Some things I'll touch upon later is that obviously with like new clean energy, a lot of those new policies that California is at the forefront, and companies like ours, we partner with the state to roll that out. So actually it's a pretty wide spectrum. That's one of the neat things about working at Edison, and actually any kind of utility or any kind of company in the energy space. It's a pretty broad spectrum of experiences and job or academic backgrounds. So you don't really have to be an engineer. Actually, I joke, it's not in my bio, but I'm actually an engineering dropout. I switched from electrical engineering to international business when I was at Fulton. So I kind of joke that I still ended up working in a field that has quite a few engineers, but you don't have to be an engineering major to work in the field.
Right.
One thing I want to stress too is your networks. You know, I always laugh about, so when I was a graduate student, I really used the internet really for the first time when I was at Long Beach. So if you imagine 1995 when the Yahoo homepage was literally just one page. You know, I probably went through the entire internet back then at the computer lab back then. But one of the things that I kind of stumbled upon, knowing that I was majoring in economics, the master's program, is I found this organization here, the National Association for Business Economics. I joined, I've been a member since around 1997. I think it's still only $30 if you're an active student. But one big recommendation I do, especially for the active students right now or the recent graduates, is that whatever field that you're in, there probably is an organization like NABE, and they usually have some kind of student membership. The benefit of a professional organization like NABE is that, one, you can meet people who work in your field, and I really cannot stress the value of informational interviews, but they usually have a good career section. So even if you're not going to be qualified for the listings that might be on there, but they usually say what kind of background that you need. So even if it's like, say, chemistry or civil engineering, you'll get a pretty good idea as to the type of candidates that they want to hire, but you also see the type of coursework, computer languages, which is like even more important, what kind of coding skills that you have, but finding a network in the area that you're interested in, becoming a student member or a recent grad member, becoming active on it is really invaluable. I have to say, the first couple of my jobs after I left the federal government were through NABE, through their job board, or going to their annual conference and just meeting people, being able to network. And again, kind of joking about how I started using the internet at the dawn of the internet age in 1995. It's a lot easier now, I think, for current students or for recent grads. You know, back then, I actually got in trouble from the department because I was faxing my resume on the econ department fax machine. But now I think current students, you have like a lot more firepower when it comes to technology compared to what I had back then. You know, you can just pretty much work on your resume from your laptop and you can pretty much send it out. Whereas even back then, it was a little bit more of like the dinosaur age of the internet. So really cannot stress networks like this. And also too, now you can create your own network too. I really cannot stress as much opportunities like LinkedIn. It's a critical tool. I think a lot of corporations, from the smallest to the biggest ones, like my company, Southern California Edison, they leverage LinkedIn profiles, right? So if you have a really great profile that has a really good biography, the stuff you've done, even if you're a student, you can list the types of classes you've done, the projects. You can list the types of analytical tools, like if you've used R, Python, or even if you can say that you've manipulated data together, or maybe you have like a writing sample. But what the companies are doing on LinkedIn is that they're buying space for their algorithms. So when a job recruiter from, like, say, SoCal Edison or from any other company, they're basically running a keyword search on all the different profiles, from the most experienced person to the person who's still in school. There's even profiles for high school students, which I think is kind of amazing. But they're churning through there too. So I think it's a really great tool when you do a job search. And when you have a really good profile, when you go to the job section, you can see the little screenshot that I have here. That job section is custom to what you have in your profile. And I think I know at the Job Placement Center at school, I think they do some LinkedIn training. I really cannot stress the possibility or taking the opportunity to take advantage of that training. Have them look at your resume, have them look at your LinkedIn profile. And it's a really great way too. And also taking the benefit of Alumni Association is that it's a great way to meet other recent Beach or even longer Long Beach graduates too. Because again, if you do a really good job of investing in your profile, list the school that you went to, the interests, the LinkedIn algorithm will start recommending people that you might be interested in being connections with. And that's a really great way too. If there's like an industry, a company that you're really interested in, it's a great way to be able to reach out to them. Like, hey, you know, I'm either a recent graduate, I'm a current student, I saw your profile. Can we just maybe, kind of hard now, obviously, with the COVID-19 situation, but maybe like a Zoom meeting or like a web meeting where you can reach out to the person. Like, hey, can I just find out about your job? Like, what did you do? What are you happy about? But LinkedIn is just a really great tool nowadays from anyone, from a current student to someone who's even more experienced in their field.
Right, and I will urge people to use the Career Center at Cal State Long Beach once this whole COVID thing kind of moves out. We've had in the past some mixers which have been helpful, because sometimes you want to take it to the next step and do a face-to-face kind of networking. And you never know who you're going to meet and who will know other people you should meet. And that's what's really great about the physical. But I love that we're using LinkedIn more.
Yeah. And a big tip that I do if I meet someone, or even if I read about someone in like a utility type newsletter that I get, I'll usually look up their LinkedIn profile too, right? You know, back a couple of years ago, it used to be business cards. I think more people network now by just exchanging LinkedIn. And do a personal message. Just don't send the basic connection message. It's like, hey, you know, we met, or I read about you, you talked about this at this event. I'd like to be able to connect with you. That really goes a long way. Because like when you get a random message with no intro, it's easier to just hit delete or to hit reject. So try to make it more personal as possible. Great. Well, let me talk a little bit about my professional experience. You did a really great job with the intro there. I will admit I've had a lot of jobs. I've always thought about it is that I've always never been afraid to apply for different positions too. So I started my career in Washington, D.C. after, well, the one summer before I graduated. That was an internship that I did. Then the Bureau of Labor Stats, they hired me full time. I was there for about 4 years. Then I was able to switch over to the State Department, where I was doing more of a international economics, international trade focus for the Western hemisphere. So I did about a total of 8 years total with the federal government. Came back to LA the first time right before the most recent recession, 2006, 2008. That's when I kind of switched more to doing more economic forecasting. That was with the LA EDC. When the recession hit in 2008, I was able to land with Moody's Analytics. They're out of Westchester, Pennsylvania. So the funny thing about that, I was their senior economist for California. I was in charge of doing a monthly forecast for the states and the metro areas, but I was based in Pennsylvania. Then about 2014, Edison hired me to they kind of stole me away back to the West Coast where I've been since, whereas their in-house forecaster. And really the one thing I want to sort of acknowledge here is that don't be afraid to apply for positions. I know sometimes it seems like with the Cal States, we get kind of overlooked, right? Because, with especially in the business area, like USC Marshall or UCLA Anderson, they kind of get a lot of attention. But don't be afraid to apply. I think if I had hung up myself and said, well, they probably don't want me, I don't have an experience, I probably would have missed out on a lot of experiences. I probably, have kind of benefited maybe applying for positions that maybe they wouldn't have looked at my background, but the fact that I did apply, that I did reach out, I think that kind of impressed them too. So never kind of sell yourself short. Obviously do a good job on the materials that they request. For the federal government, it's pretty tricky. They ask for a lot of materials. You have to make sure that you do that, especially when you're doing something that requires a background check. So at State Department, I had a top secret clearance. You have to make sure that you do that detail. But yeah, don't be afraid. Don't second guess yourself or talk yourself out of a position that you think that you may not be able to do just because you didn't go to a big school per se. But yeah, just go out there. You'd be surprised. There are a lot of Cal State graduates all over the place. And that's the neat thing about LinkedIn is that you can kind of see where people graduated from. And it's always kind of neat to see where other Cal State graduates, especially Long Beach, different parts of the business world that they land in.
Eduardo, what are some of the things that the people listening, the students and the young alum, what is it that you think is important for them to find out about the companies that they are, striving to get a job at?
Yeah, definitely do your the research. I think that's the benefit, like I mentioned before, about the professional organizations, like in my case, NAVE, the business economics, or for LinkedIn. It's a lot easier back to the old-fashioned days when I had to go to the library to look up companies or try to get computer space at the computer lab because I didn't have a home internet connection. But you don't want to waste their time. I think from when I hire interns or entry-level folks in my department, is that when you get a mass blast of resumes who just don't really qualify for the position, I think you're going to turn off people like that. But if you could do the research, there's a lot of good tools like Glassdoor where it's almost like Yelp, but for businesses, but you can kind of see people leave ratings. You can see the environment, the type of area that they want people to live in, maybe the backgrounds of recent graduates per se. But I would take advantage of the tools is try to research the company, but also research the position. And I do find too that it's a lot easier sometimes to get an informational interview. If you can use something like LinkedIn, where you can find maybe a connection at the company that you want to hire at. And if you can find someone who's willing to do an informational interview, that actually does show a lot of interest. I hear from other hiring managers at Edison, they actually are impressed. They've actually told me if someone doesn't ask for an informational interview, that's usually a sign that they're really not serious about the position. So, put on the little detective hat and just do your homework, try to reach out. Don't overkill, obviously. You want to do it within reason. But I think nowadays, you just do your research on the position and the companies you're looking at.
Also, Eduardo, I know because I used to do a lot of hiring myself. What is it that you have one or two things that really make people that come in for the interviews stand out?
The people, the people who can identify value added. I'm not sure if they had it back in Edison back then, but they call it the STAR method. But basically, when you interview for position, they want to be able to see, if they ask you a question, how does your previous experience help you for this job? They want you to be able to quantify it. You want to say, hey, well, this previous, even if it's an internship or a class project, this is the problem, this is the challenge that we had. We got to get the project done. Here's the plan that we came out, and here's the value added. Because of the step that we did in this particular hypothetical example, we increased earnings, we increased market share. We reduced the amount of time that it took us to do this task. I know, especially companies like Edison, I think a lot of major corporations, they want to be able to see from your resume, but especially the in-person interview, they want you to be able to articulate the value add. And I think that's the great thing that that's the great equalizer. It doesn't really matter where you went to school. It doesn't really matter your background. But if you can say coherently that I did these 5, 6 experiences, and these are the benefits that I have, I think that's going to stretch you. That's going to really mark you out as a really good candidate. Great. So I could talk a little bit about, I guess, the current situation, COVID-19, obviously on top of everyone's mind here, and how that's impacting my everyday job, which kind of kept me busy ever since March, since I've been working from home. And also just to give you a little bit of a background, we can segue into some of the challenges facing the utility. So for anyone who is interested in applying at a utility, whether it's Edison, like an investor-owned utility, or maybe like a municipal, like say LIDWP, Pasadena Water and Power, where I live. One common thing that's really popular, which is really driving the industry, is the idea of the duck curve. And that's what I'm showing here on the left. Basically, the idea of the duck curve is a changing peak is because of increased penetration of solar generation. So everyone probably knows someone, maybe even your own household, you may have solar panels, right, on your roof. Well, that's really changing the landscape for utilities like mine, especially I do a long-term forecast, right? Based on economic conditions, technology, population demographics. But the people who I pass along the forecast to, the buyers, their world has changed a lot, even as of a short time frame of the last 5 years. Right, so the graph that I'm showing here on the left, you can see the midday, so like around 1 p.m., 2 p.m., you can see the lines keep on going down, right? The reason that it's going down is that because so many companies, so many businesses are generating their own electricity during the midday, the demand has fallen. So what we call the shape of energy demand for a typical day has drastically changed in less than a decade. So even though the belly of the duck, so to speak, is going down during the noontime, the midday, we still have the head of the duck, the evening hours. That's really our peak. So when I do my forecast and our folks who do their short term, is that they have to account for that during the middle of the day, that there's going to be less demand because people are generating their own power. But when people get home, especially on a day like today, we're in sort of a mini heat wave, when people are working from home, but on a typical day, when people would get home like around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, they start blasting on their air conditioning, their TVs, their washers, dryers. That's when demand goes back up again. So usually before COVID-19, we were sort of in flux. We had power that was being generated in the middle of the day. If we had a surplus, which is often the case during the summertime, you would sell it to other states like Arizona, Nevada, where they have more demand because it's hotter than it is here, especially like a coastal climate like Long Beach. But we still have to make sure in the evening that we have enough power. So the idea of the duck curve, that changing shape, that really throws a curveball at us and really kind of complicates our forecast. Now we flash forward to what happened with COVID-19. Is that a lot of this is changing because obviously I'm assuming everyone who's on this webinar right now, you're at home, right? So you'll probably notice with your residential bill, it's probably gone up a lot since the last few weeks since March. But in contrast, though, our big commercial industrial users in the Southern California area, especially the big office complexes that would be blasting their AC all day, they're not, right? So on net, we've actually seen a reduction in energy demand because of the stay-at-home orders. We've seen a slight increase for residential, but it's been more than offset by decreased commercial office parks. And if you think of the big industrial users, right? So if you drive along the 405, a lot of those oil refineries, right? Well, they're at a lower capacity right now because obviously people are driving less. So there's less demand for refining oil. The jet fuel that gets used at LAX or Long Beach Airport, obviously there's less demand for that. So it's kind of thrown a curveball at us. We really weren't quite sure what to expect when the stay-at-home orders went in. We've gotten some more data points, which is a big thing for a forecaster. We need good data. But now the big question, though, is that how long are these stay-at-home orders going to stay in effect? So obviously the state, they're starting to announce. They're lifting the different stages. I think Orange County is a little bit ahead of LA County. But the big question mark for us is that how long are these stay-at-home orders, people working from home, people not going out shopping, the big industrial complexes not being at full capacity, how long is that going to be? And especially as we go into warmer weather, it's the summer, so when days like this are a little bit more typical, that's going to be the big question mark for us. And that, I think intellectually, that's the fun thing, because we've never really seen this before, and that kind of makes it fun for us as forecasters, is to try to forecast this.
Eduardo, can I ask you a question? I know that the demand is moving every which way right now, and you don't know what's going to happen. But for example, the universities are looking at doing a lot more virtual classes. Will that impact, as well as companies like Edison and others? They are doing more, maybe more people will be working from home. Is that part of what you're looking at too?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there's a good example of like the variety of backgrounds, right? So I have an econ background. I work with engineers, but we have a lot of people who specialize in public policy, especially from the states. So we're working with them, right? They're reaching out to the governor's office to try to find out. They're taking the pulse of the legislature and even at the county or city level to find out what each individual city or county is going to do, because that's going to have a big impact. So if LA County is saying that really people should be working from home longer, that's going to have a big impact. But if vice versa, Orange County kind of opens it up a little bit sooner, that's also going to have like a regional disparate impact on our forecast. So we're doing a lot of reading. You know, I try to get any kind of blog, any kind of website I can find that talks about this, and we just treat it as an additional data point, and we kind of refine. We do tests, we do different scenarios. So we're spending a lot of time trying to figure this out.
I have a question from one of the other folks. Is SCE investing in wind and solar energy? Do you see these being used more in the future?
Absolutely, and actually that might be a good segue here. So the outlook. So what we talk about is disruption. So I've only been with the utility since 2014. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of change, and there's going to be a whole lot more change going forward. Probably the biggest thing that's going to disrupt the technology for us is home battery storage. So right now, like I mentioned for the duck, right, the duck curve, people will generate power during the daytime. But up until really last year or more recently, people really couldn't keep the power that they generated during the day. What they would usually do, and not to get too technical, but there's usually a net energy metering regime where we would buy that power from the home generator or the commercial generator, and we would add that back to the grid. And if we had too much, like I mentioned before, especially during the summer days, we would sell it to Nevada or we would sell it to Arizona. But with the home battery, so if you look at the lower left quadrant there, that's a Tesla Powerwall. Someone who has like an affiliated Tesla solar regime on their roof, they could generate the power, but instead of selling it to us or their utility company, they could keep it. They could keep the power there, so when they come back home from work in the evening, like I mentioned before, crank on the AC, maybe recharge their Tesla or whatever kind of car that they have. They would just use the power that they generated during the day. So we do have some investments, especially commercial scale battery storage. I think there's even a plant in the Long Beach, Seal Beach area, pretty close to campus, that we're actually converting. So instead of being a natural gas plant, we're actually doing like large commercial scale battery storage there, so that during the summertime when the heat waves hit, so instead of doing a technology that would do emissions like natural gas or coal, we would actually have this commercial scale battery in scale too. We do have a lot of things that we work with solar generators. So if you ever drive out to Vegas and you see those big solar panels out there in the middle of the desert, you can kind of, if you fly into Vegas, you fly right over it. We actually do some investments, but we also do a lot of long-term contracts. So we are required by the state to have so much green sources, and we just kind of want to do it on our own as well too. So we will reach out to wind generators or solar generators, and we'll do a long-term contract to say that every year for so much given period, we'll buy that power from them.
Eduardo, for some of the students out there, because there's such an emphasis in renewables, what are some of the areas of study that they should be focusing on if really that is, I think, the wave of the future?
Yeah. A lot of combination of engineering, like I mentioned before. So people who have a good EE, electrical engineering background, mechanical. Life sciences, environmental, which obviously is a strong suit for the school, obviously. So people who are focusing on environmental science, environmental policy, both at the undergraduate, but especially at the graduate level too. I think that's a pretty good combination of folks. So a lot of the people that I work with in our regulatory affairs section, a lot of them have usually some kind of a combination of some engineering or some combination of like environmental science background. Another area that's going to be really a challenge for us, if you look at the lower right, are wildfires, right, and climate change, right? We're working with our state with our forecasted climate change, because obviously that's going to impact us. If it's going to get warmer, obviously, over the next few decades, and that's going to increase demand. But we also have, it's a double-edged sword of the fire danger, right? So if more climate change and we have more population in areas that are prone to fires, that's a big risk for us. It's a big risk for the state, and it's a big risk for the for our customers. So obviously we stress safety of our customers is pretty paramount. But that's a big challenge for us going forward. Is the fire seasons are year round as opposed to just being in the fall. Like when I was a kid growing up in Orange County in the 70s and 80s, we have a year round fire season, but we also have a year round demand for power. So we've invested a lot of effort on this, from replacing fire poles, like old wooden utility poles that are prone to fires in our most fire prone areas, in the San Gabriel Mountains, the Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino area, to doing stuff that's a little bit more safer, to even investing into a fleet of drones who actually go out and inspect our utility poles and our lines throughout. We have like thousands and thousands, not millions of miles of lines throughout the service territory, but we have an entire force of like drones and programmers and people who monitor the drones, the images that are going out there too. Some of it, you know, obviously is required by the state, but again, it's an investment that we want to do, that we don't want to like cause danger to our area, and we want to be able to retain a safe network as soon as possible and going forward. So I think the combination between new technologies, so here I'm showing like an EV, solar panels, battery storage, but the wildfires, I think those are probably the four biggest areas that are changing the challenges, what it means to be an electric utility in this century.
Eduardo, can I ask you if there's, because of the fires, is there any new technologies that you're looking at in terms of safer ways to get that electricity out into those areas? Or is there, I don't know what that would be. It'd have to be a leap, a quantum leap into something.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we now use drones because using drones probably reduces the time that would take us to inspect our entire network, probably like by 80% to 90%. Because before it was like we were sending out crews of people with like handheld cameras to take a look at it. Drones allow us to do that. Artificial intelligence. So for people with a math or computer science background, we're actually using AI and designing algorithms to actually come up with these scenarios so that they can go out, take the combination of like how old the power line network is, different weather conditions. We can do scenarios. We have historical weather for our entire area that goes back decades and decades. But we have people who are actually using AI to actually try to come up with algorithms so we can kind of decide which lines to prioritize, so that we don't really have to focus on trying to replace 100% of them. And that would probably take us like 4 to 5 years. But using AI, we can actually design algorithms that give us the highest priorities, that these areas have had the history of being in wildfires. They're the oldest combinations and such. So I think we're trying to use as much of that quantitative data science that's available out there. And a lot of people coming out of really good programs, including Long Beach, have been studying that. They're able to provide really good insights. I actually think those people with that kind of quantitative backgrounds, from when I talk to them and I talk to their managers, I think they feel that they're able to make an immediate impact just on day one, based off of what they've been studying, different projects they've done, different experiences. And I think we highly value that as a company.
Okay, great. And I know that we're talking about university level, but there's also a lot, when you look at utilities, all utilities, there's a lot of different areas. It's the people that have to build, that's the infrastructure as well. There's a lot of engineering and everything that goes into that, but there's also people that are physically out there and people that need to manage those people.
Yeah.
So, when you look at a utility, you'd be surprised at how many career paths there are, right?
Yeah, we actually have a big demographic challenge. I think all utilities across the country do, because the average age of our linemen is usually like around 50 years old or older. And I know we're, along with LIDWP and the municipals, that we're actually recruiting at the high school level, vocational training. So we try to reach out to LI Unified and the other school districts to try to identify students who might be interested. And there we can kind of tell them like, hey, like with going 2 years to like a trade school or a community college that has like lineman training, you could be earning like $70,000, $80,000 like 2 years after high school. And that's a big challenge for utilities across the country, is that average age of that line man or woman is increasing every year. And we're really worried, like other utilities, that we may not have enough people to fill those positions over the next decade.
Somebody asked, what do you see as the future for SCE with all of what you've mentioned?
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. So with more people able to cut the cord, so to speak, or at least reduce how much power they're doing from us, we obviously want to be able to be a good backstop, because even if people think that they can be 100% on their own, we still need to be there in case of an emergency, in case of big heat wave where people just can't generate their own. I show the car there, the Bolt. We're actually working with the state right now for an electric vehicle charging network, right? So as part of the state's goals to kind of promote the use, the penetration of electric vehicles across the state, they need the utilities like us to kind of work with them to set up those networks. So we work with city governments, we work with companies. Like for instance, my office is in Rosemead when I'm there, but we're right across the street from the Panda Express headquarters. And we actually work with them. We actually installed 100 electric vehicle chargers at their offices, which is a great benefit for their workers to kind of so if you work at main corporate for Panda Express, you can now use their chargers there too. So that's one area that we're working with a lot of companies that do that electric vehicle network too. But we still also have the distribution system. So even if more people are distributing on their own, some cities are now doing their own procurement of electric power, but we still have to maintain that network. We're going to be in that business for a long time. We've been like over 100 years. We're still going to be in that network of maintaining that transmission network and making it as safe as possible.
I believe you answered this question already, but maybe let me frame it the way they've asked. If 25 to 35% of employees work at home for the foreseeable future, and probably beyond, if people start wanting to do that, will the power grid support this? What can the electric grid handle a workforce split between business and home office?
Yeah, so one of the neat things about what I do is that, so especially people, the econ students who are listening right now, so I'm more of a macro economist. But we even do our forecast down to what we call the substation, so even down to less than like a half of a city area. So what we're doing now is that we're trying to see what the impact is at the substation level. So like a hot day today, I think people are probably realizing how much they're going to be using their AC over the next few weeks and how much they saved money when they were working from an office. But we're tracking that. And what we're doing is that we're trying to identify areas that have a lot of people working from home. We're tracking that data. We're doing forecast models to see what the impact is over the summer. And we're putting in reinforcements, so to speak, to make sure that we can meet that demand. One of the neat things about the electricity network, it's kind of like a big game or a big puzzle, right? So if there's an area of demand that surges one area, we can kind of maneuver, we can send power from one part of the utility, our network, to another area. We do that a lot during hot days. So we're already trying to model that already so that when we get into our peak period, which is usually late August, early September, So you think about that, that's usually the hottest day of the year. And it's also when we have the most sunlight during that hot period. So we're actually doing some planning already to see how we're going to meet peak demand in our peak period, late August or September, if we still have a lot of people working from home.
Another question was, and I know you can speak to what we do when we don't have enough power here in California, but is there any concern that Southern California will run out of energy as our population continues to increase? Is there a breaking point?
Now, one of the really neat things from a forecasting perspective is that usually from like, say then during the height of the Cold War, and you think about like when TRW, a lot of the defense plants were all throughout LA and Orange County, and during that post-World War II period, electricity usage and gross domestic product, GDP, economic output, were pretty much one-on-one. But what we've noticed though is that there's been a big decoupling ever since the last recession in 2009, whereas before it was sort of one-to-one, you needed like one additional unit of energy for each additional unit of output. That's really not the case anymore because companies are becoming more efficient. You can generate more output, especially if you're a big industrial plant, like a cement mixer, oil refinery, or some other kind of manufacturing with less energy than you needed a couple of years ago. In fact, I'm actually forecasting declining load or flat load for the next couple of years. A lot of that is because of the efficiency gains. That's really the neat thing, kind of before these renewable technologies that I'm kind of identified earlier. But actually the revolution in efficiency in manufacturing processes, or even if you think about like if you have like an electronic thermostat in your house, that you can kind of program it, or even some of the electric vehicle chargers that a lot of people have, you can actually time it so that it generates or it charges your car when power is the cheapest if you're like on a time of use rate. So there's been a lot of efficiency gains the last few years that I've actually reduced the demand for electricity for us rather than increase it.
Someone's asking, what is your proudest personal accomplishment?
Oh.
I think it might be talking about work. I'm not sure.
No, I think that's a really great, that's a good curveball, actually. It's a good question. I'd have to say just overall, my experiences, like I said, I know the job placement one here and my old professors who are on this aren't gonna like this, but I've never really had a master plan. I've just tried to apply for different things and it's lucked out. I think I've been really proud that I've been able to do a lot of cool things. Like when I worked at the State Department, I had a top secret clearance, I had a diplomatic passport. I got to travel all throughout Latin America and Europe on behalf of the US government, which I think is kind of cool. To kind of be the face of the government. I think some of the teaching experiences, I've actually been an adjunct professor at Long Beach, in addition to Pepperdine and Westchester University, which is a small state school in Pennsylvania. I think that's probably one of the most rewarding things I've done is actually able to teach, have a captive audience of students there for about 3 hours, but able to kind of go through a lot of different things. And I think more recently with my forecast is I like being an expert. I like going into an area that I don't know and just diving in head first and just becoming like the most knowledgeable person. And that I can kind of present that to the company, to our consumers, to someone else. I think when I'm able to kind of roll up my sleeves and just own a project like that, I think that brings a lot of pride to me in the work that I do.
Someone's also asking, what did you wish you had known or learned before graduating?
That's a good question. I think I lucked out in some of the forecasts. It's kind of funny because in the MA program in econometrics, we do a lot of forecasting. I think I was pretty lucky at Moody that I was able to do the hands-on. I think I learned as a business forecaster, there's a little bit of a difference in the academic forecasting in that. In business forecasting, we want it to work. We want a good model. We want it to be good, but we may not spend as much time as we do as trying to get as many as possible variables or try to answer every question. I think in the business world, when it comes to forecasting, is that you're kind of under the gun. in that you just want it to work, and then you sort of like fix it along the way that you go. So I think the way to get around that is that having internships, having experiences, being able to reach out to people who are on the business side of aspects to find out the things, how the difference between the academic mindset versus the business mindset, how that works. I think if I had been exposed to that a little bit more, I think that would have maybe kind of eased my pathway into the business forecasting world a little bit sooner.
We got a lot of questions here. So how
Okay.
have your day-to-day duties changed as an economist?
I'm assuming since COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been pretty busy. So usually I would do an annual forecast. Then I kind of would just sort of help out on different areas, maybe kind of map out what things we want to improve on with the company, different areas, maybe work out with the field engineers, issues there. We've been pretty much doing COVID like 24/7. One of the challenges as a forecaster and as an economist is that, like I mentioned before, this is really unprecedented. Really not since 1917 Spanish flu pandemic, when the economy was a lot more agricultural based as opposed to a much more services based economy that we have today. There's really no blueprint or a book that we could go to find out what the impact is. So we've been doing a lot of modeling. I think I'm on my 4th version of a forecast since March, because every time we get more data points or we identify there's an area that we need to focus on, we have to kind of redo our forecast all over again. The good thing about that, though, is that we've been getting a lot of process improvements. So usually it would take 3 months for us to do a forecast. I think the last one that we did it like in a week, because now we're getting a lot of practice of doing it. We're finding a lot of shortcuts, process improvements we've been able to do. But I think that's the big difference, is that instead of being able to have a little bit more time to do the forecast, we're under a lot more time pressure to be able to tell the powers that be and the people that rely on our forecast what the future is going to be.
One of our folks is asking, what tools and techniques do you use for business forecasting?
The main tool that I use, and I actually used it as a student in the econ program, is actually eViews. So eViews is a statistical package for econometrics for time series forecasting. It's probably one of the best ones. They're actually based out of Irvine, over by UC Irvine. So I use that tool to do my forecast. But what I've always kind of gotten back to as a forecaster, or if you're in an analytical position and people rely on you, one of the best tools is to know what's going on. That's going to be through a combination of online newspapers, good news sources, blogs, people who write in your industry, because the data will only tell you so much. You really have to have a good pulse of whatever industry you're going to go into. You have to sort of become the expert, like I mentioned before, the expert in your field. And a lot of that is just reading, listening, and seeing different things as much as possible to kind of give you a really good worldview of your world.
I know you've already talked a little bit about what's been going on with COVID-19. Are there any big surprises that you've seen in terms of electric use trends, or even just your operations? Any big surprises?
Yeah, most people across industry and the economics world is that they're surprised at how relatively easy it was for people to work from home. I know education, especially K through 12, I think they've had a little bit more challenges adjusting. But I think what a lot of businesses are acknowledging is that they probably could survive with a lot more share of their workers working from home than in what they had thought maybe as recently as early February. People probably heard about the announcement from Twitter, is that going forward, if you want to work remotely, you can work remotely, per se. Some companies like Facebook have been a little bit more hesitant. I think they want a little bit more control of their workers. They kind of value that, that interpersonal communication, people kind of collaborating in person. But I think you're probably going to see a lot more people working remotely from home in the future, which a lot of people didn't think would be possible when the year started.
Well, I know that the universities were already looking at tracking future trends into that area. And I don't know that it would ever happen with anything in K-12 or even elementary, but for sure at our level. So I know you might want to just spend the last, I think we have about 10 minutes talking about how Edison's looking at building their future, beyond COVID, but in general.
Sure. So here's my time for a commercial. So we are hiring. So again, if once this presentation is made available, I put some links here just for edisoncareers.com. And in particular, so technically I'm under environmental policy. So we have quite a few positions. I do have to note though, because obviously like a lot of companies right now, we're looking at the bottom line. There may be a review coming up as to which positions will continue to be. So don't hesitate to apply. But I think wildfire mitigation is a good example, right? Even in wildfire danger doesn't stop because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We still have those challenges. We still need people who need to jump into that as soon as possible. And we also have a lot of our technology goals, like electric vehicles, helping people adopt to battery storage. So we still have a lot of mandates from the state and stuff that we've identified that we want to go into that are still open here. So I really want to encourage you guys to, if you guys are interested in careers at Edison, is to jump onto these two links. Follow us on LinkedIn. And actually, I think that's how I got my job, to be honest. When I was working back east, I think I had followed Edison, as that was one of the few companies I'd followed. And I remember the spring of 2014, right before I came out for the interview, I got like an ad on LinkedIn saying, hey, you might want to apply for this forecasting job at Southern California Edison, and I applied. So again, kind of putting the bow on the message here is that use those networking tools to try to identify those companies and follow them and try to get as much information as possible too. If you guys want to send out my contact info, and actually my LinkedIn profile, the link there is my LinkedIn profile. So if you guys want to send me an invite, I'd be more than happy to accept the invite and to answer questions that folks might have going forward.
Great. Any other questions? I've been trying to follow them as best I can. Wondering if there are any reading recommendations or favorite books in terms of what you read or what you have read in the past to really fill out your learning in these different areas that have opened up.
Yeah, so one of the cool things now is that there usually is a industry newspaper or website for whatever field that you want to go into, and they usually have free newsletters. I'm sure we have a lot of people with logistics backgrounds with the different really great programs that they have at Long Beach now. So like Journal of Commerce, right? They have a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for. There's a paywall, but even with like the newsletter, you can get a pretty good idea as to the different trends, especially the stuff facing Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA. Major newspapers, so the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they have really good business sections, and they have really excellent newsletter sections too. What I try to do is I try to sign up for different newsletters, and usually they will recommend a book. They'll recommend like a deep dive article, and then I'll go to that. So if you can find newsletters like that as much as possible, I think that's a really great benefit. On my Kindle, I try to read a lot. I'm a big econ nerd, obviously, but I try to read a lot of economic history. Like a neat book that I read about a year ago was a book about the industrial policy during World War II, how the federal government first struggled at first to try to get enough munitions, armaments, and other supplies for the war efforts, and how they finally reached out to industries like Ford, or like famously an example of California, like Kaiser Steel, like the naval yards that we had up in the Bay Area, steel plants. We still have a couple remaining ones in Fontana, but how like industry sort of helped that war effort too. So I think there's a lot of excellent books. I think the gateway for me for good literature is a good newsletter from a good source, like either like Journal of Commerce, the Economist magazine, which I have a subscription, which I've had actually since Long Beach State. They have a lot of good recommendations about books and additional articles there too to follow.
I have an interesting question. To be an economist, do you have to be the best in math?
No. If any of my professors are online, they would probably agree with that too. No, I think you have to understand it. I'm the type of learner where I have to kind of break things apart. Like one of my best friends, who actually is now the chief economics person for BOS out of their LA office, Taryn, natural math wizard. She's the type of person who just understands something like the first time the professor would do it. I am not that student. I'm the type of student who would go home over the weekends, maybe do a spreadsheet or just kind of break it down. I think if you sort of understand it and maybe sort of interpret your own way, you don't need to be a math whiz. Like I said, I'm like the poster boy of that. I'm living proof that you don't have to be a math whiz to be an economist. I think you have to be interested. You have to be, whether it be like micro, like behavioral economics is a big area, right? You know, the consumer level, or someone like me, I'm more big picture. I think if you're interested in systems, you're interested in how things work, I think that'll help you in a whole lot of social science disciplines like anthropology, economics, and even engineering fields. I think it's more the natural interest than like the actual mathematical plan. That's what the calculator now, that's what the software for. They do the math for you, but you still have to understand how it works.
And I just ask you a question about risk management and how through this whole COVID thing, I know you're monitoring. I don't know what kind of monitoring you're doing, except for what you've already told us in terms of, you know, how much power or, you know, that duck curve, but also how quickly are you mitigating some of what's happened with COVID?
Yeah, so one of my biggest downstream customers of the company is our procurement folks. So they take my forecast and they go out and buy power on the spot market for near term, or they try to do long-term contracts. Like I mentioned, like we'll do long-term contracts with a lot of renewable plants. So pretty much since March, I mentioned that's what's been keeping us so busy, is that we had to review all of our contracts and we had to review all of our positions pretty much like overnight, because we knew there was going to be an impact. We knew more people were going to be working from home, but we really didn't know what the extent of it was. So part of it was to kind of get out of our more expensive contracts, because we weren't going to need as much power, but we needed to make sure that we had enough power for the residential folks in the areas. So if you think of like the Inland Empire, so a lot of people commute, say from like Riverside, San Marin County into Orange County or LA. So maybe during the daytime, there would be less usage there, but there's increased usage there. So we had to make sure for the contracts that we still had and for our substations that they could handle the increased demand per se. So a lot of modeling based off that.
Great. Well, I'm going to kick it back to Noemi, unless you have any final thoughts, Eduardo. You've got it.
Sure. Feel free to reach out to me if you didn't get any questions, and be more happy to answer any questions you have. But again, thank you for the opportunity for doing this. Really enjoyed it.
Noemi?
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you, Lucia, for joining us today. Before we go, just a reminder, just wanted to let you guys know that this recording will be on our website, on our on-demand webpage. And please visit our website to learn more about our future industry chats, and follow us on social media at CSULB Alumni, And thank you so much, and we hope you could join us next time. Thank you.
Thank you.